Hmm.
Terry, can you hear us?
Given the fact I've been dealing with technical problems all day today, I'm like, watching somebody else deal with technical problems. I actually feel a little better about this.
Matt, is your screen that one? You might turn up your volume because it's on 0. See if that
Yeah, that's why we don't want to do that.
seems like that's the only way we were hearing them before.
That's feedback. That's just straight. See? How many of these do you have?
Yeah, I've been able to hear you the whole time. Can you hear me? Yeah, I've just gotten like a half hour's worth of work done in the last 10 minutes while you've been doing that. I know. And I just kept ignoring it because you were asking the same question over and over. Can I hear? Can you hear us? Yes.
Yes. Yes, I'm here. I can hear you guys. Yeah, it's not, I can hear I can tell what you're saying.
Yep. I'm good.
I
So the idea is that at some point here, when they're done, it'll be a question and answer period. I'm assuming that's what we kind of talked about. So we should be in good shape there. I don't know, we may want to, for the sake of the people on Zoom, we may just want to go across the room real quick and introduce ourselves so that they have an idea of who's in the room and things. So, Councilman, I think we'll just start with you and we'll work our way some logical order this way.
Randy Kogorsik, City Council member. George Rifford, I'm on the EDAC. Harrison Hall, I'm the chair of the Economic Development Advisory Committee. Steve Shute, Mayor. John Bowman.
Yep. Dave Knopick, I'm the Community Development Director. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of go along the table. Okay.
Dave Holland, lead pastor of Restoration Church. Jason Davis with the Chamber of Commerce.
Charles doesn't need to introduce himself. You've seen him running around. He's with IT. He's doing it. Okay. Okay. Good to have you all here. So welcome. We're going to go ahead and we'll get the presentation started, and then Matt and Terry, whenever you're ready to open the conversation, we'll just go from there, okay? Matt?
Sure. Yeah, can you all hear me just fine if I don't need to yell?
Yep.
Okay, great. So it's good to see some of you, hear some familiar faces or voices. Some of the names and voices I recognize from the process, even though can't quite see everybody's faces. So it's good to catch up. And I would say I'm actually really excited to hear someone say they're a prospective downtown business owner sitting in the room. So that's great to hear. That's a real driver for why this project was conceived of to begin with, was how can Gardner create a place that attracts people and businesses into downtown to continue to strengthen its vibrancy and as a thriving downtown and make it a true destination. So good to hear that there's some interest in that. So what we thought we would do is spend a little time just kind of going through the background. How did we get here? What brought the project about? But really then go into, I'm going to have Matt review the concepts that are in the document, and then we want to get to talking about implementation and answer questions. And it was kind of tough to hear people when they were introducing themselves. So I would suggest having Jason relay all your questions in his radio voice, because we all know you can hear him wherever he's at. But yeah, so you can see what the pictures that are on the screen. We kicked this off with a bus tour, and Dave, it was probably a good thing you mentioned if we've got any precedents that we could share that might be comparable, and how other communities have been able to successfully implement things, to be able to talk about some of those tonight if questions come up. And that's really, our hit list is really the communities we visited on the bus tour. I think one that's probably most appropriate that we may chat about is Linden Square in downtown Gladstone, and the role that the creation of a green space had in its revitalization that's ongoing. The others we can talk about as well if questions come up. Some of them are more streetscape oriented. You may or may not be aware that Overland Park is going to be revamping their farmers market soon. So that was a process. They went through a study a couple of years ago, and they have now budgeted for essentially rebuilding or redesigning and building a new market essentially in the same location, and rethinking how that could be part of maybe even have a development partner in that. So, there's some other things brewing in the metro, even since we toured these communities back in 18 or 19. All right, Matt, go ahead.
Terry, while he's making the change here, I'm just gonna let people know we did distribute microphones out at the tables, and they do need to know the mics are live, and we're also live streaming tonight, so if you're even whispering, it might get picked up. I'm just gonna warn you now. They get one warning, that's it.
That's right. I won't hear you, but the important people out there will that are watching. So this is the overall master plan. Matt, can you go back? I think we skipped some stuff I did want to touch on. Maybe, yeah, just, sorry, we didn't rehearse this. So we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants here, but just kind of go through page by page real quick. I'll tell you when I want to stop and talk about something here. Yeah, we don't need to really dwell on existing conditions. Everybody's familiar with that. So let's just talk a little bit about the process. So everybody remembers if you participated, we engaged the community in a number of public meetings, as well as attended the food truck event on the Fridays we set up over at the Parklet. And even though it was rainy, the one day we were out there, we got pretty good input. Keep going, Matt. But, you know, we really did we thought some really good engagement from the community. You know, whether it was a food truck event or whether it was a workshop there at the senior center, we got a lot of good feedback. Keep going. And then one thing that we did that was invaluable partially for the plan, but also for Public Works to really kind of further expand their hit list of items, was this walk and roll and inviting the community folks out that are in wheelchairs or have other mobility challenges to walk and help us understand how they experience downtown. And it unearthed a lot of things that most of us just quite frankly step over, pun intended. And that really influenced, you know, a lot of the things we did from a overall pedestrian and connectivity standpoint. But then we also, there was a lot of discussion, as there always is, about parking. Back when we originally started this, it would have been in probably 14, the first round, when we did the Main Street corridor plan. Parking was a big part of that, big part of the discussion. And really throughout both efforts, the discussion around parking was more about management and the need for how you're managing the parking, more so than really a need to add parking. You know, we use the phrase in the design world of, you know, you don't design the church for your Easter and Christmas capacity. You design it for the day to day. And that's the same way we handle, you know, parking, especially in these downtown and urban areas, is you're not trying to park it for the festivals. You're really trying to park it for the everyday. And when you have special events, you have the county fair, things like that, you're going to have special accommodations for that. But, you know, what is unique about Gardner's downtown is the state highway that runs through on Main Street. And having spent a lot of time out there over the years we were working on these projects, we understand why people, they don't tend to choose parking on Main Street maybe for their first choice. Seems like Elm fills up if you're going to the coffee shop or some of the other businesses down there. And it's not because the spaces aren't big enough. They're actually fairly wide, but you do have large trucks. You've got a lot of traffic going by. There's not really anything right now in the way of traffic calming in this area. So that's why way back when your last round on your comp plan was updated, it introduced the concept of a median as a way of beginning to calm the traffic. And so that's carried forward, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But we're still thinking there's, you know, that parking on Main Street is important. And it's, you know, to a certain extent, it kind of is what it is. Hopefully we are able to slow traffic. And maybe at some point in the future, there is an alternate route that the city and KDOT can work through together to maybe keep some of that truck traffic out of the downtown area as it continues to thrive. And then I'm going to say a couple more things and then turn it over to Matt. But Another key element of this, I heard someone from Presbyterian Church was in the room. Partnerships is huge. That's a huge component of what we talked about, whether it was partnerships with school district, with the county fair board, with the church, as well as with downtown businesses or future developers. We had some good discussions with the people that own Blazers about their future plans and wanting to make sure that they continue to be a strong part of the Gardner downtown scene as long as they're interested in doing so. And so, that's a theme that's going to continue to be important is partnerships. How can the city be a key partner in facilitating this? It doesn't mean the city has to be buying land. It doesn't mean the city has to be buying buildings, but it does mean the city needs to play an active role in facilitation. And facilitation, even maybe to the point of incentivizing projects. So, we'll talk in a little bit in implementation about this, but be thinking about what can the city do and what's the city willing to do to make things happen, make this plan or make kind of a further evolution of this plan happen, whether it's the introduction of a permanent structure for the market or some of this vibrant kind of downtown green space. Really, a key goal of this project was creating a heart. We heard that on the Main Street corridor plan. We heard it again early on in this was, folks just felt like there was no heart or no there, as we say, because Gardner is along a corridor. So people understand where downtown is at that that intersection of Elm and Main and the buildings that are around there and the businesses. But there's really, where do you gather? The park is there. The aquatics take up a big portion of that. But is there a place? And it seemed like that area north of City Hall is really that prime opportunity. And that's kind of how this plan evolved. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to let Matt kind of walk through the concepts, and then we can spend more time really answering your questions so we get to what you're wanting to learn about.
Also partnerships with the library as well. I mean, looking at their parking lot and kind of figuring out how to do shared parking. But by doing that, creating some stormwater amenities, some plazas, a farmer's market here with this shade structure. Today, it's kind of up here. What would it be like if it was down here? What if you were connected to downtown, went shopping afterwards, you're just kind of closer, more things are happening. And then during the week, people are parking under there, so it still functions like an everyday parking lot. We're just creating that kind of known location for farmers markets. So again, kind of bolstering that as well. Looking at the park here, maybe there's a botanical kind of garden-esque theme here. We were looking at the Flint Hills and the rollingness of that and how that could kind of play its way into this. But really looking at an amphitheater condition here, again, for community events, community gathering, all those kinds of things where you just have a nice park that you could go through micro moments of just kind of going in for a day, grabbing some food at Blazers, walking over the park, hanging out, or you have a larger event, so those macro moments where you have a concert or a tree lighting or something like that in this space. And then we also looked at Cornerstone up here. There's a playground out there that gets a lot of use, but we talked about making it inclusive and a destination playground. So again, that can be an attractor for downtown where people are coming in, kids are spending a good hour having fun, and then you go shopping or you go eating or something like that. And then how does that play with shelters you can rent to the pool, again, creating revenue off those things as well. And then we also looked at this kind of community building. So again, you could have art shows, craft shows, all these different kinds of things in this kind of open space. One of the projects we visited was in Independence, and they had a farmer's market, but they also had this community building. And it was just a concrete room, but it was very kind of modern and cool. And they just used it for all those different kinds of roll-up doors. And so, again, a lot of flow in and out. It was just a great space for them to use. So we looked at those basic spaces as those kind of place-making components. And I'll show you a couple images here. So again, here's potentially what that farmer's market shed could look like. Again, parking during the day, but then trucks would back up for the farmer's market, and people would meander down here to do all their farmer's market shopping, looking at best management practices for stormwater management, so bioswales, rain gardens, things like that throughout the plan.
Hey, Matt, can you go back up? I want to touch on something real quick on that master plan.
Yep.
So one thing that, just so everybody can kind of understand what they're looking at, is the tan colored buildings that we're showing there would be future proposed development or new buildings. And down on the south side of Main Street, just south of City Hall, we're showing an infill opportunity there is the parking lot that's adjacent to, well, it used to be the pharmacy. I'm not sure if something's back in there now between that and the bank. So that's just kind of everybody's oriented about what they're looking at there.
And Terry, maybe you can talk a little bit about this property you touched on, or you talked to a developer
Sure.
a bit.
Yeah, so that area we identified as a potential for some multifamily housing to try to bring in some additional density and rooftops that would help to attract more of these prospective businesses to downtown. So creating some consumers that are within walking distance of shops and storefronts and restaurants and things like that. So that's what's shown in the two buildings that maybe they aren't connected, but and then in the corner there, the notion was that, you know, because that of the importance of that corner, it could be more than what it is today. And so just identifying it as a future redevelopment opportunity that could create more critical mass, maybe two-story mixed use building on the corner, might have some office, could even have, you know, maybe restaurant or something down on the ground floor, but something that's, you know, really anchoring that corner more than the building that's there today. And we did have a conversation, and honestly, forgive me, I can't remember the name of the developer. He was a local gentleman, and he seemed to have some interest and thought there was some opportunity there. You all would know him. It's a family business, and he basically said, you know, I think this is intriguing. Met with myself and Larry Powell and talked about it. He said but he just needed to talk to the rest of his family. I don't know if at the time he was beginning to transition out or start to hand things over, but really in his mind, he felt like to make it happen, he needed to see probably a minimum count of about 60 units of some mix. I don't know if we were quite there. What we were showing here was something that may not be the right model, but it was a model that was, you know, had some structured parking on the ground level, and then that created that kind of concrete podium with could be 2, could be 3 stories above that. So that's kind of what we were insinuating there. And then you can see some kind of 2-story mixed use building there on the corner in the foreground. And then the other thing that you don't see in this is the group home. So obviously that's a key part of this and it could be maybe one of the first things that would need to happen for any of this to occur. And that was part of the discussion we had with this developer was, is there an opportunity for some sort of partnership and swap with the city and maybe find the group home a better place? At the time, I believe there were 10 residents. But that building they were in may not be, you know, really up to current quality standards, codes, and that maybe there's an opportunity to find, you know, a home that they could move into that's better, more modern, and figure out a way to swap that out and make that land more available for something like you're seeing in these renderings. And then there were additional discussions, which we can go into about even, you know, land on the west side of Center, that you kind of create the initial seed, you plant the seeds here, but you can begin to see how that could even begin to jump Center to create more opportunities for density as people find these really cool things to do in downtown.
So again, with new potential buildings and things like that, here's City Hall, so you get your bearings, and then Main Street. But again, looking at these kind of, we mentioned a restaurant, so maybe you have an outdoor dining, things like that can happen. Again, creating that nice flavor downtown. Here's that shed that we were talking about in the back for the farmer's market. And then we also thought about this vertical element kind of being this central node. Usually we look at gateways for communities, apologies, and it's usually at one end and the other, you kind of bookend them. But this one, we felt like there was a strong kind of gravitational pull that we felt like one nice vertical element could be a cool addition, kind of raise the ceiling a little bit in downtown and create this nice environment and create that there throughout that area. Again, here's another look. Again, who knows what this would be in the end, but again, it's just showing some kind of vertical element that embraces the downtown. Again, here's some of the images. This is like an outdoor plaza. This is behind City Hall. There's the amphitheater, or the shelter for the farmer's market. And there's a better view here. Again, showing that vertical element. Here's maybe you back some trucks in here for your Food Truck Friday Frenzy. And again, have this kind of urban plaza for art shows. Just again, community events. Right now, I think there's like 4 or 5 parking stalls back there. Some of them are handicapped, which we have placed along Main Street now. So again, it's kind of an underutilized space. Could it be more? Potentially. This is kind of what our first blush at that was, is creating an urban plaza. Then again, as I mentioned, the spine connects you all the way to this proposed community building and Cornerstone Park.
Hey, Matt, the other thing to note here is that space, that green space along the spine there, at the time, the library was really excited about this notion of having more space for outdoor programming. And so since they own the parking back there, that seemed like a really good opportunity, and that, so it's more than parking and just sort of a shade space. They really do see the opportunity to begin to program that depending upon how it's ultimately designed.
This is the church property again. We mentioned those residential units, multifamily with a garage below. So what can this park be? Again, amphitheater, event plaza, shade structures, the landscaping kind of screening some of this area from the road, but creating just a beautiful environment that really connects Cornerstone to City Hall. So it's kind of that missing tooth that could be really interesting, and kind of tying everything and stitching it together for the downtown area. I think that might be the last one. I'm wrong. And again, we talked about destination playground. Here are those pavilions that could be rentable through the Parks Department. Fountain features kind of on access with the City Hall. And then just some open park land. So if you have an event here that you want people to spill out of, community building, you can kind of leverage that lawn space as well to have a larger event. So just looking at what some of these opportunities are. I mean, you own this property already, so this is one of those first projects you could do technically right away.
Hey, Matt, that view I think is a good one to show also. We had multiple conversations with the church and representatives from the church. And so there were some key things that came out of that. So, at that time, where we landed was that just making sure that, because they own, essentially all of this green space between the church and, say, Blazers, roughly. I mean, there's some in and outs there. And they were open to the idea of some sort of partnership as long as they still maintain the ability to do the things they use that lawn space for. And then ultimately where we landed was they felt comfortable saying, go ahead and show these proposed things as long as you're west of the power line or the power pole that's out in that green space, which is about right down the middle. And there's large trees there that they want to maintain, which we totally agree, keep those. But otherwise that lawn space is essentially where they sort of said, hey, let's draw the line here. Obviously there are steps that they have to go through running it up the chain of command within the church, but they felt like they were at least comfortable with us showing something over on the western end of that property.
I don't know if you want to talk about streetscape, Terry, or if you want to go to implementation.
No, let's talk about the streetscape. Just kind of give them an overall rundown of that.
We had 3 kind of streets throughout the downtown. Orange is your primary street. That purple color was a secondary street, and then the tertiary was the light blue. So again, basically things were layered based on those. So if you had a priority street, it was getting all the amenities, you know, pedestrian poles, landscaping, markers, things like that. Once you went down to a secondary street, then you would get a little bit less, and then tertiary was just kind of the bare minimum. So you're basically kind of building it up. And we looked at what those could be as far as banners, landscape, markers, site furnishings. All these things would kind of be layered within those streets. And then just some sections of what those look like. And then kind of some corner features here. So this would be Main and
Elm.
Elm, thank you. So again, corner treatments, pavers, markers potentially as these small little gateway moments. And then really just kind of creating a space that once people want to slow down as they go through. It's kind of that calming, that kind of good friction. But also you feel safe crossing and you feel comfortable crossing through conditions like this. I think the median helps that as well. But creating a better environment and a nice welcoming intersection as this highway kind of moves through your downtown area.
Yep, I'll go back to that. So another thing that we talked about, since this was funded in part from Mark through a PSP grant, it had to be transportation oriented. So that's why we're talking about the potential of adding density, which can support transit bus ridership. But then we also looked at a mobility hub that was a part of this. And this map, you can see where we identified that potential location. We worked with Ride KC on kind of where the best location might be that would work for the city, the downtown, their ridership, but also kind of fit the route. And we had looked at one that was up on, I believe it's Shawnee, kind of just north of where the farmers market's shown there, as one location. But ultimately, this was a better option. So you can see by the arrows essentially how the route would loop. So at the time, and I don't know if Ride KC's implemented this or not, but this was going to become, or maybe it already is, the southern terminus of that route. So this would be where it would loop, and there would be a shuttle that would take kind of more of a local circulator that would pick up people from this location to take them farther south to Edgerton, to the the distribution and the kind of the hub of jobs down to the south, down center. So this hub, mobility hub, I think there was if you go up, Matt, there was so you can see here an illustration of what that could look like. So something enhanced beyond just a sign. So some sort of shelter. So as folks are waiting on the bus, waiting on the shuttle, potentially even if micromobility like scooters or e-bikes or anything like that come into downtown Gardner, this could be a hub for those. So people can, basically take a bike, get that last mile of service home or, to lunch or whatever. So that's what that shows. And that would include a little bit of parking there as well. So not a huge parking ride, but there would be the availability of some parking along the street, along Park, to support that. And then I won't dwell on this too much, but on the ADA front, we did have, with Wilson's help, they went through and did an inventory of all available parking and ADA parking, or available ADA parking, and basically came up with a proposed strategy for distributing adequate ADA parking throughout downtown in those public parking areas. So not looking at private parking lots, but just on street and then the public lots behind City Hall. And essentially what they did is they took kind of the standard approach. If you were, if you're designing or you're building a new building or a new facility or park or whatever, you've got to have so many minimum number of ADA stalls, including van accessible stalls, per whatever your total parking count is. So basically they took that same approach and identified in these kind of block by block areas, this is how you could distribute ADA parking so that moving forward, you're doing a good job of having it equally distributed. So you've got kind of that equitable approach to parking, and you're not just saying putting it all on Main Street or putting it all on Elm or so forth. So that's what this would illustrate. So as you begin to implement streetscape improvements or other road improvements, you've got that as a guide of, where you maybe want to distribute or implement new ADA parking. So before we go on, let's pause there because next we want to kind of talk about how we approached defining an implementation strategy. Are there any questions, comments, thoughts over what we've discussed so far?
Stephanie, do you have any questions so far?
Dave, I do have a question, actually.
Go ahead.
It was Terry, right?
Yeah, Terry.
Terry, hey, this is George Rifford. I had a question on the, what you referenced, traffic calming. In order to implement some of these ideas, which I think are great, by the way, how much traffic calming we think is going to be necessary down that Main Street corridor? Also, taking into account Waverly Road not being finished yet to the intermodal, if it does finish ever, how would that impact the traffic calming?
So Matt, can you repeat the question?
Yes, he's asking in regards to traffic calming on Main Street, and then how it kind of works with Waverly on the west as well. What do we see? Is there a need for
Additional, or what does it even look like? Because assuming that that road does eventually get paved from 56 Highway down to the intermodal on the west side of Gardner, I would imagine that's going to increase the traffic. There's going to be more truck traffic.
So I'll speak to what I can or what I know, and I'll fake the rest. How about that? Who's listening? So there's a couple things we got to think about. I think you said how much traffic calming can you even do, or how much would you do? I think the real question is how much will KDOT allow us to do, which is a bit of a struggle. So on the highway or on Main Street, really about what we're showing is probably going to be about as far as we can go. And what we're showing is narrowing the through lanes by a foot or so. I think we've got 11-foot lanes rather than 12. So we're narrowing those down. We're narrowing the parking stalls from, I think they were 12 to maybe 10, which is still pretty sizable, and putting in that median. And even though it's still a straight shot through, it is very much a visual, you're narrowing the kind of visual field. So if you think about it, as you get west on 56 and you start, I forget the name of the church, but the Catholic church, when you get out that direction, the road opens up. You really have no buildings on either side. You've got broad setbacks. And naturally, that's where people really tend to accelerate because it feels open and wide and you've got room. You feel safer doing that. So the narrower you constrict the road, if we can get more people to park on Main, that in and of itself can be a traffic calming measure. And then you throw that median in there and you just narrow the lane so people intuitively slow down. So that's what we can try to do there. As it connects to on the Waverly question, so something we learned, and others there might be able to speak to this even more. So from a traffic standpoint, the bulk of the traffic on the corridor in terms of numbers is from the interstate to center. I want to say it was like 20,000 average daily vehicles. And then they turn north or south on Center, and they're heading to their neighborhoods or whatever. So and then there's a big drop. I don't remember what the drop off was, but it was significant when you get west of Center. And what we were told and understand is that the majority of truck traffic isn't coming and going to the intermodal. It's coming and going from farther west on 57. And I don't recall, somebody tell me, is there a quarry or is there something else out there? Or is that just a main route to get farther west into Kansas? And it's the most direct route. Somebody might have to speak to that.
It's the main east-west corridor, going west from Kansas City out towards southwest Kansas and then on to Santa Fe. And,
Okay.
It follows the Santa Fe Trail.
Yeah. But it's really not our understanding. I mean, the intermodal, they're heading down, they're getting to the interstate as fast as they can. So I wouldn't anticipate paving of Waverly increasing the truck traffic significantly. Now, something changes if something else is built out there. I mean, there's a lot of land out there, so that could all change the traffic flow. But I think for the most part, those trucks they're not looking for, they're not interested in going through downtown if they don't have to. They just want to get out to the interstate as quick as they can. So if it's not the most direct route, they're not going to do it. Now, could it affect some commuter traffic? Possibly. But again, I think that's, part of that is what can we do to provide housing for that workforce that, maybe they don't have to drive right through downtown. Where can they live in the community? Any other questions?
I kind of want to follow back up with what George just talked about with slowing down. When was the last time you did a traffic count on this whole area? Because the truck traffic has increased, and the concern also is that that speed limit down Main Street is 30 already, and it turns to 35, past Elm? And
Going east, yeah.
so the concern is also the side streets, that they skip the whole going down Main Street and then turning speed down the side streets. So, I mean, these are things I brought up a couple of years ago when we were visiting this. So that's my biggest concern is, when was the last time you did a traffic count down Main?
Let's see, we did traffic counts. I'm trying to think if so I know when we first started the main, so we did traffic counts at these locations as a part of this study. So that would have been in 2018 or early, it would have been 2019. That was the last time we had anybody out on site doing any counting, and it was primarily these intersection locations. And so there you can see, that's kind of what I was referring to, is when you get, you can see the drop. There's a significant amount of traffic that's heading off on Center from Main. As far as the
I'll also check, because of the way the question is, I'll check and see if the state or anybody else has done any traffic counts since your study. So
okay.
if there are any updates there, I know the state does things on a rotational basis. They probably did not do all of these intersections though, but I can't confirm that yet, so I'll follow up on that.
Yeah.
Okay. And as far as the parallel streets, I guess I don't, so I'm not sure, I don't remember hearing a lot about that. So I couldn't quite hear your question, but concern about a lot of traffic diverting to the parallel, like?
I think what Jennifer's talking about is Sycamore Street, so on the far east there, folks will, they'll get off at Sycamore to go to Park, and then go west on Park, because there's a lot of residences down Park, but it also allows them to avoid the two lights that are at Elm and Center.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's something that would have to be looked at, is if that is do some counts, like you're saying, find out what that number is, and kind of identify what the issue really is, and if it's a every morning, every evening, and if that is something, if what would a strategy be to deter that.
Shawnee, not so much, because there's the stop signs at Elm, which call them traffic around the school. There's nothing like that on the. Yeah, in fact, they'll even go down as far south as Warren Street because there are no stop signs at all on Warren.
So are they just trying to head south on Center, or where are they going? Okay.
Yes, they're going south.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that wasn't anything that we didn't dig into that a lot. The primary thing we were looking at was on Main. But that's something definitely that, could be studied.
Any other questions or thoughts before they go into implementation?
So yeah, reduce the size of that a little bit. So after we developed the concepts, we had a work session with city staff, with finance, city management, planning, public works, just kind of talk through how some different projects could be, move forward from a funding standpoint. And, are there any things coming up on CIP that could be a catalyst for moving any of these projects forward? Does KDOT have, at the time, kind of questioning what did KDOT have going on that might help kind of encourage us? I think there was work happening on Main east of downtown or something in the works that KDOT was going to do, resurfacing that. Did that lead us to maybe do anything to prioritize any work on Main Street? So that was one discussion we had, but then we engaged the steering committee in a workshop to identify. We just had them broken up into 3 different groups, and they were each, or 4 groups, presented with different scenarios to kind of think through. And we identified 3 potential projects plus the streetscape. So we tried to look at the whole master plan and say, okay, what if you can't do it all at once? What would logical phases look like? And not necessarily that one has to go before the other, but trying to identify phases that could be in an individual package, that if you did project number 3 first, that would be fine. You wouldn't have to do 1 and 2 before that, or you could do 2 as a standalone project if something triggered that. And essentially what we're trying to do is identify these that said, okay, everything within that outline of number 3 by City Hall Plaza, it would be a struggle to do any of those individual things without doing that whole thing. You're not going to really be able to build anything until, or the market especially, until you address relocation or working out the group home. And then to do that, it probably ought to be a pretty significant project. So you're probably looking at, you're rethinking your parking back there while you're talking to the library. So it's just, that's kind of how these on this diagram is trying to show that these seem like the logical project buckets, if you will, that you could do. Now, project number 2, the Civic Green, that could be scaled. That could be sort of done in stages within it. So for instance, you could maybe just put in the sidewalks and plant some trees and create a space. Maybe you don't do anything with any kind of shade structure or anything like that. That could be done in the future. So even though these are identified as projects, there are ways that you could potentially phase some of them in. Same with Cornerstone Park. You could do some of that in phases within that, but the idea being that you don't have to try to do everything at once. The through the scenarios exercises that the committee worked on, that really helped. The purpose of that was to make them think about and understand that, you know, these things aren't necessarily always linear. It's hard to script out today exactly the sequence of how things are going to be implemented over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years or more, especially when it takes partnerships and it takes working with a developer or some other group, and the city doesn't own the land, but the city wants to catalyze this stuff. So you have to be somewhat nimble. So we kind of tasked them with having to think about that a little bit. And it was, I think it was one of our most energetic work sessions, quite frankly, that we had with them. And everybody kind of got them excited about, okay, I see how this kind of works. And I also see how challenging this is. So the folks that are in economic development in the room, you know, it gave them a little taste of how tough it is to sort of pull projects together. And, well, you could do that, but what happens if this? And we essentially presented them with a what if scenario and said, if this happens, what would you do to react to it? And they had to work through that. And we had them do that on the streetscape as well. So not just on these areas. Matt, can you scroll down? Yeah, so, yeah, there it was. It was down the next page at streetscapes, and then we'll come back to this. So basically we gave them, you know, that kind of breakdown of we did block by block, and it was a similar sort of thing. We had a group talk about how would you prioritize streetscape, and we gave them a what if scenario. And so they were able to sort of, with that input from them, that then helped inform staff as to, okay, here's probably a logical sequence of things. But it also, we captured their input in this document so that then elected officials and city leadership can, when opportunities arise, look at, well, what did this community group think we ought to do first if something like this happens? So for instance, Matt, if you scroll back up to the plan diagram for the projects, the 3 project areas. So for instance, if a developer was to come forward and say, hey, city, I'm interested in trying to build some apartments downtown, but I need some help assembling land, or, you know, I think what you're doing here, they might see this plan as something that's intriguing. They want to be a part of it. But I don't want to build anything until you put a stake in the ground, and then I know you're serious. So they're basically implying, hey, these green space elements are a pretty cool attraction for me, and I think I could really lease out apartments pretty easily next to this market or next to the civic green space. How soon is the city going to build that? So that's that kind of catalyst that makes the city say, okay, so you kind of chicken and egg it and work that back and forth. And that could come right in the middle of when you're already talking about, hey, we're going to spend $3 or $4 million of a Cornerstone Park, and somebody says, hey, we've got something else coming up here. So that's where the give and take has to occur. But everybody has already sort of had that discussion about, you know, what are the important aspects to us. So Matt, scroll down to the bottom of this page or the next page. So that table right there at the bottom of that page 36. So we identified in this chart, just to kind of give you a bit of a roadmap, but it's still going to be somewhat fluid and market responsive or market reactive. But, you know, kind of identified their in buckets. I think, if I remember right, there were committees that maybe already talk about transportation. You, the Economic Development Committee, you know, access committee, access management, and then you know, and then there's the CCLIP program. So we tried to use some things that were some infrastructure that's already in place, and kind of give an identification of what types of projects could fall within that in that center column. And then on the right side, what some potential funding opportunities might be that could be kind of partnered up with some of these types of projects. So that's what that's beginning to show there. And I think, Matt, I think we've got one of those on the next page as well. Maybe not. I mean, I don't want to just keep talking. I guess I'd rather just answer questions if you have some specifically about. In this, you've got some order of magnitude costs, you know, potential phasing discussion, and kind of what's important to kind of the ultimate realization. It talks about the consistency of leadership. This type of meeting that you're having here gets more people educated and informed about the plan, and it brings more awareness to what were the priorities that went into the plan 2.5, 3 years ago now. But yeah, I think I'd rather just open it up to questions so that we can get to what other things you might want to learn about.
Any questions from the committee group, and then I'll open it up to the bigger group. See if Stephanie's on there. Stephanie, do you have any questions for the consultant?
No, I don't have any questions. I thought that that was a really good point, that the developer feedback had been that they thought maybe 60 plus residential units would be needed. So yeah, I thought that finding a way to incorporate more residential units might make this something that's attractive enough that it kind of gets off the ground and goes somewhere.
Yeah, and Stephanie, you know, that, I mean, it's a lot of conversations and, you know, and relationships, and you got to, you know, just put these things in front of people and get their reaction. And, you know, one individual thought 60 was probably the minimum that they would need to make it pencil out. Quite honestly, today, I don't know what that number would be in today's market. But that's just kind of part of the process is,
Yeah.
and I think it's important that the city, this is your vision. This isn't setting a code that says we have this many spaces or anything. It's a vision. Now, how can we achieve this? Or how can we keep it from being diluted by just grabbing the first thing that comes to us?
Yeah. Would that many units, it seems like it would present a parking challenge though.
Correct. And that's part of the discussion. That's why in the concept we showed, you know, it included some structured parking within it, because you don't want to just give up downtown square footage for parking. And, you know, so that's part of the strategy, is making sure that, you know, and it could be a case where, you know, a step the city might want to take is if they can work with a landowner to identify some property that they could potentially, you know, either acquire or position somehow through, you know, getting things under contract or letters of intent or whatever it might be, form some sort of partnership that kind of identifies an area, and then put out, you know, a request, put out a solicitation and to the development community for X project, define the parameters of what you'd like to see happen, and, you know, see what the development community comes back with, but say, this is our vision, this is what we're trying to achieve, but give them the flexibility to sort of build a unit count or a unit mix. And you can tell them what you do or don't want to allow in terms of parking, and other parameters. And just, you know, but you got to figure out how to get the land encumbered in some fashion, or at least, you know, getting it secured to a certain extent that you can actually do that. Right now, you know, without owning the land, it's difficult to do that.
Right.
Are there others in the room that may have questions? Comment
So, oh,
You know it now.
a couple people gave me, I don't think I need those, do I, Terry? Terry,
I can hear you.
I figured as much. So okay, so we would say everybody sits in this room and says they want to get started, you know, and you know, kind of that first steps. I think sometimes out of the gate is the most. They took away my mic. Is the most
There's another one.
is the most challenging part, and you know, and obviously we did this a couple years ago. It was before COVID. You know, we'll just chalk up to the last year and a half. We haven't done a lot. Do we start talking about it? Like, I mean, we know some of the downtown business owners have heard about it, but many haven't. I mean, is it a matter of people need to start going door to door downtown? We need to get a couple, you know, boards up. Like we put a board, you know, we put different development boards up in our office, and people walk by and they can see them. And you know, maybe it's at the coffee shop. We have one there, and so people can start asking questions and talking about it, or do you keep it? I mean, because obviously the fear for everybody is going to be who's going to do it and how much is it going to cost, you know? And so how do we get that part rolling so that people
Right.
get excited about it?
So, a couple things. So Matt pulled up this picture, which is good segue. So we toured, and I don't know who all was on that out of this group that's there tonight, but we toured Linden Square in downtown Gladstone. So to answer your question, what do you do first? You can only do, or you can only, I guess you can only do what you can control, meaning you're not going to be able to go out and start building something on land you don't own. You own right of way, or you work with KDOT for right of way. You own the park. So, but I think what is important, maybe even beyond just putting up boards and saying, hey, this is what we want, come see us, is actually putting something in the ground. Putting, you know, making a real investment in civic infrastructure. Now, I think you could do that at Cornerstone Park, but I'd have to kind of think about that. The concern I have, and I don't know if it's real or just in my mind, is that if you did that project first, I think by and large, the community would just see it as they did some improvements to the park. I don't know that necessarily catalyzes anything new to happen, like building the market and redoing everything behind City Hall. All of a sudden starts to show, wow, they're actually serious about this. Or working with the church to try to do that green space in between Washington and Shawnee and create something that now all of a sudden you can start shifting where you have events, and that becomes a hub of activity that then the folks that, you know, I forget the gentleman's name that owns those properties west of the park with that green space. I mean, I think he's willing to sell for the right price. But you got to get somebody, it's only worth what somebody will pay, and you got to get somebody interested. And so this Linden Square project, I think, is a good example of the city doing something first. They built this civic park space, and that, you know, it was on land that either they owned, Matt, or they were able to do a land swap. But and I'm going to let Matt tell you about the whole project, but it created, City Hall is in their background, the background of this image. It created a relatively small, intimate green space that they program the heck out of, and it brings a ton of people into this poor part of downtown. It was never there before. I mean, it was, if you'd been to Gladstone, 8-10 years ago before this was built, there was nothing here. You would drive right by this, you'd go to the pool, maybe you'd go to the community center somewhere, and that was it. And then Matt, I'll let you kind of talk through, you know, partnership and kind of what this catalyzed beyond this project.
size as Cornerstone Park right now. So those two are very similar in size.
Is Cornerstone Park the area we're talking about, not the whole Cornerstone Park?
Correct. The Cornerstone Park, as it is today, is the same size as Linden Square is here, as far as that orange dash line goes.
Matt, I'm just clarifying. Cornerstone Park includes the aquatic facility and parking and
I'm just including the green space where we did our design. Yep.
right. Yep. Just making sure.
So, and this includes a parking lot, the amphitheater, and then as part of the process, we had some more park space on the west, but it was a catalyst, and a lot of people started asking about what building could go here, what could happen. So the city basically built that building. It's 3 levels with a walkout basically on the bottom. So the bottom has bathrooms. Show my cursor. The bottom has bathrooms, it has a concession stand, and it has storage for the ice. And then the 2 floors above it, they rented out to a dentist, which he saw the school right to the north there and said, yeah, I want to be here. And then the school said, yeah, we want to be there too. So the school leased the top floor as for additional flex space. So the city built it, they paid for it, and then they're obviously leasing out the spaces as needed, but created that just through their own purposes of wanting to create something awesome in this location. And by doing that, the next thing that kind of happened, the Heights came on. They saw that park and like, hey, we want to be there. And so they worked with the city, and they have the, I don't remember how many units are there, but just a ton of units in downtown, a huge influx of folks now that are using the community center, that are using the park, that are at the restaurants. And so that was a great boost for them. And then they said, well, what if we got more stuff going on down here? So they wanted to move their farmer's market here. So we did a study for that. They now use that space, but it hasn't been developed yet. But again, how do we get more synergy downtown? And then from that, a hotel is going in now. I think it's under construction now. But again, all these things kind of started with the park, and they just kind of snowballed from there. And right now, we're working on their streetscape gateway project. So they say, hey, people are coming off North Oak, we want to give them a nice arrival as you come down in this space. And so we're building, here it is today, there's the apartments, the Summit Grill, so a mixed-use building. Today they've got parallel parking with a median. And they said, well, what if we had more parking? So let's do angle parking. Let's take the median out. Let's have this great festoon lighting, catenary light experience as you kind of go towards the park and City Hall, and then kind of what that feels like at night as well. So they're continuing to build off that, knowing that they can see the fruits of their labor through this process. And Linden Square was 1.2 million. That was in 2013. It has all the bells and whistles with speakers and all these light or the outlets. Movie screen pulls down, so they have movie nights, things like that. A fountain up front. So 1.2 million was a nice budget for that park. And so based on that, they've seen a lot of things that have come from it. It's a good investment for them, and just creating a better downtown kind of central hub for their folks.
Hey, Matt, the other thing I think it's worth noting, so North Oak Traffic Way, I believe that's a state highway or state right of way, I believe, isn't it?
Yes.
Is that one or something? I forget what it is, but so there's MoDOT right of way right adjacent to all this. Granted, it doesn't come right through, but it's a very similar story. Gladstone had been there a long time, but had no downtown. If you ask somebody where downtown Gladstone was, they would have no idea, even if they lived there, because they had a city hall and they had a park across the street on the other side of Holmes, and that was about it. This is now giving them an identity of where is downtown Gladstone. So I think, Jason, to your point, what do you do first? I think find something that, it takes money, obviously, but I think identify something that, is that dictating or are you typing?
I've never seen that feature. That's pretty cool.
Is this on your computer or on Zoom? Because if it's on your computer, I'm going to talk about Matt Evett.
Yeah.
No, I guess what I was going to say is I think find something significant to do. And we we caution people, don't, and we've had clients do this, like, hey, let's do this thing over here. We've got 80 grand. What can we do? They do it, they implement, and then nobody even knows it happened because it was so insignificant. And it's just not even, it doesn't get anybody excited. And I know money isn't just falling out of trees, but if you can amass enough money to do, say, the streetscape on Main Street, update that. I mean, I think if you did the improvements at the Main and Elm hub and even went north and south on Elm, that would get people's attention, especially those folks that might be looking to move a business somewhere into this core to say, oh, wow, this is a refreshed, cool space. Doing, you know, that, if I remember right, I think the cheapest of those 3 projects north of City Hall is probably that green space. If there's a way to do something there that's meaningful, that's going to be a longer haul because of the relationship with the church and trying to work through that. And you know, don't get me wrong, I think doing something at the park could be successful. If you could build that sort of multi-purpose building, that could be a good thing. You know, nobody said it could only be this multi-use kind of space. I think to the Linden Square concept, if the city builds something, maybe there's more to it than just flex meeting space. Maybe there is a partnership there that brings additional, you know, revenue generation, leasable space, but some sort of user that can catalyze more. So
Terry, we have, just to give you an update of what we've done with the plan since you all gave it to us, we have actually gone and spoken with multiple larger developers that have done this kind of work in downtown districts before. One of the things, we actually had some interest from a couple of name developers that have done work like this in the Kansas City metro area. Obviously, COVID hit, and that kind of put a damper on a lot of these mixed-use projects. But now things are starting to roar back pretty fast. But one of the things that they were talking about with us and the things that we've been hearing from other communities is that you really need to have that master developer partner that can help to get this in place. Trying to do some of these aspects just strictly on your own, a lot of times it doesn't work because you've got a lot of political resistance in some cases. You get a lot of people saying, well, we don't have to do all that downtown. Why do all that? So if you had a private partner that could help to maybe sell the concept, that actually helps the acceptance of this.
Yeah, Mayor, I think that's a great point. And it's true. It's even more true because you don't own the land. You don't own the land.
Correct.
And that's the real catch. So we're doing something similar right now down in Park City, Kansas. And they're getting ready to, in fact, I've got it here reviewing it, issue an RFP for exactly what you're talking about, a development partner to help them realize a downtown district where they don't have one. The difference is they bought 48 acres a couple of years ago for that sole purpose. So they're in that position, but they had 48 acres of crops right next to City Hall. A little bit different than what you have. And that is the challenge, but you're right. A private partner can go around and have conversations, talk about assembling property a lot more nimbly and a heck of a lot easier than a city can. And that's probably something to talk about as well. When you talk about what do you do first, maybe that is a good first move, is to try to find someone who, you can strike a deal with to do something like that.
Comments or questions? Terry, I've been refraining from saying much, but I think part of this and part of the reason the group here, the committee, wanted to get together again, the committee, for the most part, the 5 people that are on here are relatively new to the committee. They've been appointed within probably the last 9 months, somewhere in that range. And so they were just getting used to kind of reading through these documents and things like that. And I think the important part that I pull for this for the committee to understand is, partnership is a key word in the success of any of these projects. And it's not just with the master developer, but I do believe, and it's part of the reason we reached out to Jason and the chamber board and some of the contacts he had with downtown interests with some of the property owners or business owners, is that idea that everybody's got to be bought into this. It's not just simply a matter of having the vision in a document and saying, okay, now we've got it, the city is going to go do everything. This is one of those elements that you have to look at it from the standpoint of the partnership of what's the momentum and the desire of even the downtown businesses and people that have interests there to be willing to hear about these concepts, but also participate in seeing them come to their fruition. And I think, I think about what you were talking about with Gladstone, and it took a number of years just to get to this point. I don't know what the total numbers of years were. I know my experience in Lenexa, it went vision to where it is today, and that's been almost 30 years, 25, 30 years it took to get from a vision document to what they're doing now in the city center area. Now, that was a greenfield development. Understand it was totally different.
Right.
But a lot of these downtown efforts are things that evolve incrementally. They're done in pieces that can be chewed off and taken on. But at the end of the day, the momentum has to be, or at least the torch carrying goes beyond the city itself. And I know we talk about the city a lot instead of projects, but you might speak to some of that with your guys' experience with different projects, just from the standpoint of how maybe we organize a little bit more so that we've got people really advocating this from different areas. The mayor can do his from the bully pulpit side. This group can do things with its, what I want to say, with what's been given to them as their charge and work. But I do think there's a role for the chamber. I do think there's a role for individual property owners and businesses in here. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit from other experiences?
Sure. Yeah. So a couple things that came to mind when you were talking, but so I would suggest, and you are smart people, you probably are already doing this, but you're not doing something, you're not reinventing the wheel here. You're not doing something that hasn't been done before. I would certainly recommend that you reach out to your peers in other communities. Scott Wingerson up in Gladstone, great guy. He was out, gave us the nickel tour of Linden Square. He would talk to anybody that wanted to ask him how he went about doing this. So whether that's Jim or someone else that wants to reach out, he isn't going to see you as a competitor. He's not going to, it's a good thing. So I would encourage that first and foremost, is reach out to other communities that you have peers in. Your benchmark communities could be Kansas, could not be, to see what they're doing and what's in the recipe for their success and what can you learn. But to the point of how do you organize? Dave, I think it's do you need a quote downtown development committee? I'd hate to say form another committee just to add more meetings on people's plates. You've got the right people in the room there, maybe supplement that, or maybe there's a working group within your EDAC or something to that effect. But maybe there's some way to do that, create sort of an ad hoc or some sort of group of champions that includes the chamber, it includes business owners. We had people that were very interested and active when we started this. I'm sure that, was it Steve? I can't remember the guy's name, who owns coffee shop. Folks like that, I mean, they get it. I mean, he gets it. He's an entrepreneur. So I think if you can enlist those people in this effort, that's where you're going to get some of that energy, as well as some of the longer time people, the businesses, the banks. We had a good conversation with I forget the bank that's where the chamber is, what that bank is down there. We met with them. I think they're those folks are committed to the community. They'd be a good partner potentially to talk to. And maybe that's worth a chamber lunch discussion, or maybe downtown becomes a regular agenda item for your chamber meetings or something like that. Just start getting it to become a regular topic of conversation. I don't know to what extent you do that already, but if, it's small moves like that you say it enough and people get bored and tired of hearing about it, they're going to do something just to make you shut up. So, it could be some of those kinds of moves that the people in the room here that have that, like say the bully pulpit, or they've got the leverage, or they've got the ability to craft agenda like Jason does with the chamber. I think of downtown Kansas City, different scale, obviously, but the downtown council, they've got their infrastructure committee, they've got a green space committee, they've got these different committees. Monthly meeting, things are always on the agenda. There may not be anything talked about, but that agenda item is always on there. And it's just a reminder that this is important. We may not have anything to talk about this month, but next month we might. So some of that's just communication is really, I guess, what that would come down to.
Hey, Terry, this is Randy, and I think David hit on the nail on the head. I think the mayor spoke well to the point, but it really does have to become a grassroots campaign. And as I looked around the room, I see, one landowner, which is Sam with the old Gardner pharmacy. I see the Warren Place represented. I see Tim Miller. He's not a landowner, but he's a business downtown. I see the bank, U.S. Bank, I think it was. But my point.
Well, there went that support.
Yeah. I've already cashed your check. Don't worry, Terry. But my point is, we have a minority of that group, and Steve Hines is a great example to your entrepreneurial comment. But I don't know what the catalyst is, and today might start that. I applaud the Economic Development Advisory Board for getting this going, and I appreciate you guys coming for kind of this overview. But it really has to start with the buy-in. Those business owners, whether it's Ken down at the mechanic shop, or the newspaper, or the wardrobe, the dry cleaners, et cetera, or Dr. Cook, the chiropractor, or the furniture store across the street. They all have to have not just buy-in, but they have to understand what they're getting out of this dance, if you will, this opportunity. And I think tonight or today might be a good catalyst for that, but it has to be spoken of. It has to be campaigned on, if you will. I think the city could take some steps, to your point, just from a roadway project, and narrow that field of view as you talk about, and then look for those 3PL partners that, again, we could kind of pivot off of through that investment and what the city could bring. But all understanding that that's still, heavily funded for our part, if you will, on the tax base. So that's kind of the yin and the yang of it. But I appreciate you guys.
We're trying to get some grant funding also, because there's a lot of opportunities out there with grant funding that we've explored with our grants coordinator. We're looking at some revitalization money. So that's another piece there, another critical part. If we come with a little bit of capital that's matching capital, that is also attractive to 3Ps, because they want to know that we have funding or financing lined up for our piece. They want to know that we are coming with something to the table.
Right. When we were working on this project, at that time, Baldwin City had an RFP out for their downtown, space, and I believe they had some money leveraged through Evergy or somebody, so they had some grant funding there. Yep. And then I saw an RFP recently for Edgerton for their downtown green space. So these other communities are probably looking at funding as well, but they're trying to move forward these spaces because they know they're quality of life spaces, and how can you kind of get something going? It's really the big challenge.
And I think the important thing with that is that some of these places are smaller than Gardner by many means, and aren't even seeing necessarily the same growth that we're seeing. I think that's an important characteristic. It's something that we can leverage as a community, quite frankly. I know Eudora right now through a redevelopment project. They are just approved a final plan for an active open space in a redevelopment area. They actually got hold of some old school property. They got a few developers interested in bringing some commercial development, and now that is spinning off to create their open space that has very similar features. So it is doable. It's not like it's something that can't be done. I don't think there's anything in the plan, Terry and Matt, I didn't see anything there that is such a reach that it's so pie in the sky that it's not a doable item. I think those things are all there. It's really, how do we incrementally attack it, and what are we really committed to as a community?
No, it's all manageable, and it's all to a certain extent scalable. I think the one project I mentioned that isn't as infinitely scalable is the space right behind City Hall. But sometimes the best things are harder. And I do think, not to get too philosophical, I do think that is going to be the key. Is maybe you can do some low hanging fruit to get some energy, but when you take off or take down the big kind of more difficult project, I think that's when you're going to show people that we're serious and this is happening. But yeah, that takes time. You mentioned other communities that are doing things. Little old Osawatomie is going to start doing some things. Is it Mike Scanlon, new city administrator down there? He's going to make some things happen. And, they got a MARC grant just like this. They're doing a study, and he's got some big ideas, but he's motivated to make stuff happen. And they're leveraging their trail connectivity. That's their thing. So you guys have the fair. I know there's kind of discussion about good, bad, or otherwise, but the fair is there. We started to break that barrier a little bit and get them at the table to talk. Just from a selfish standpoint, I would love to see that move forward and, 10 years down the road, find out that Johnson County Fair is all of a sudden this great big new thing 10, 20 years from now. But it's the elephant in the room, and you can't just sort of not do something with it. And again, that comes back to things, sometimes the best things are difficult.
Well,
So
just for your information, Terry, there's some discussion at the county level that's underway right now regarding the future of the fair. So
good.
There may be some movement on that.
Good. And whatever movement that is, I think the good thing is there's discussion, because what we heard was county commission really didn't talk about the fair at all, except here's your 40 grand you get every year, or whatever it was.
Well, that's definitely changed. So
I do think, Terry, too, and Jason, you can, refute what I'm about to say. Jason and I met earlier this week and talked a little bit about this. I think right now we have, between the two of us, we understand the importance of this item and trying to get it going. And I think the communication aspect that was pointed to just a little bit ago here by the councilman and some other things, opening up those conversations between the different groups is going to be important. But the other thing I'm going to urge, while we've got a captive audience sitting here, it's one thing for a staff member or even a president of a chamber to come and talk to somebody. It's another thing when citizens are talking to each other about this stuff, and the face-to-face conversations that go on are really one of the most critical, I think, communication aspects of this. So trying to get enough people educated that they feel comfortable talking to that neighboring business or property owner a little bit about that, and why the vision's important, why we're going there, and not just that the city wants to enhance its tax base kind of argument, right? You hear that all the time. I think this is more about what does this community stand for, and are we going to accomplish the vision that we're after? That citizen conversation at that level, that grassroots level, you mentioned that, becomes really critical for success, quite frankly. Because even if you get a master developer, it's much easier for them to operate within an environment that's friendly to the concept versus one that's in arguments about the concept or just has turned the concept off. Thoughts on that?
Oh no, I'm nodding. I completely agree with everything you said. That's my thought.
Yeah, Your nods are small on our screen.
Oh, okay. I thought I was still the whole screen. I didn't realize.
So, just real quick, Terry, so is there a way to, the general person, and I'm not gonna put any of my people on the spot here, it's a long plan. And, the general person's not gonna sit down and read, 80 pages. Maybe they will at some point, and, in that, is there a way for us or for you, or maybe it's a staff thing, to distill this down into something that's manageable in chunks that we can take out? Because if I'm gonna sit like at our chamber board meeting next week and, for my board members who aren't here, I can't go over, I mean, they're gonna,
Right.
their eyes will gloss over on page 2, and so having, like when I talked about having a board of, here's a potential of what this overall project can look like visually, and here are kind of the steps, and here's kind of, just a little background. Is there a way that that's something that you guys can provide, or is that something that is on the staff to do?
Yes. So I think one thing, Jason, is pull the implementation section. That's the most important thing you're going to want to share with people. Because that, and you can show the concepts, but really that shows you what the big ideas are and kind of, and I get a little, I mean, it's a public document, the numbers are out there, but the numbers are getting older.
Yeah.
So everybody just needs to understand that those numbers, especially in today's construction economy, I wouldn't hang anything on those numbers right now. But I think it at least gives you an order of magnitude that this is more expensive than this or whatever. Gives you, a fairly big target to aim at. But I think it would be pretty easy to pull together just and we may even have it from one of our earlier PowerPoints that we could send that just shows like big images of the renderings of the plan concepts, and not all the words that get in the way. And then you could have that, and then the implementation part to go with it.
I assume, Terry, what we could do, and to Jason's point, is, and I'll work through Matt here in the Kansas City area.
Yeah.
I'm sure between the products that were delivered, I'm not sure of all the formats and things because this was all done before I got here, but I'm sure between either the products that you've delivered or through the raw files that you have already from the project that are still on file, we can figure out a way to put the USA Today version kind of together for that. Because you're right, it really is. It's just like when you make a pitch about a community. If you throw a 50-page document on a CEO's desk, they don't have the time to read the 50 pages. They want to get right to the point. I think that's, Jason, that's the point here, is how do we get that distilled to a point where when we are out in the public or when it's available even as a brochure, we got it laying at the library and other places around downtown, people can pick it up and walk away with a good understanding of what it is.
Here's a hint, pictures.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of pictures. No, that's what sells it.
Yeah.
I did have a question I thought of afterwards. So on the downtown, I don't remember which one, 1, 2, or 3. By the way, this is George. How does the plan accommodate for any potential or possible future downtown festivals?
Matt, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so we had I guess it was number 2, that center on the property there with the church, and that was kind of be that destination community gathering, amphitheater, open space. And so we were thinking that would be a great spot for festivals. Easily can be connected to downtown, City Hall, or Cornerstone Park. I felt like it was a nice central hub to have that. I think it also spill out in the spaces too, depending on the size. Between that green space and the downtown Civic Plaza, we had bollards where you could shut the road down, basically join those two spaces. So really kind of create this great environment for the size of your event that you need.
Accommodate for stage.
Correct, yep.
Yeah, I think about the only place we would really have a hard time, when I'm talking about the public realm here, about the only place we would have a hard time with programming a festival is really Main Street, because it's KDOT, right away, and that takes a lot of effort, because the shutdown State Road is not something that's just done every day. But in fact, most of the right of ways that we have control of, plus the open spaces, like you're saying, I I think the design allows for great flexibility for those festivals. And I think that's what people are going to with a lot of the buildings even, and the structures that go on these public spaces now. It's all about, this may serve, in fact, Eudora, what the concept is there. It's really kind of interesting because they're talking about it as a farmer's market covering, but they're also talking about it as the food truck place, right? So I can still have this covered picnic table area. So on a hot summer day, you're not out in the sun baking away as you're eating your lunch. Yeah, so, you know, it's fascinating. The whole idea behind these things now is, you know, how can I use this in multiple ways to go do that? So you can put the Arts and Crafts Festival under that same shelter building, so it's getting programmed potentially 4 days a week instead of twice a month. And so that's what I think is, with this design, is the same thing. How do we allow it to have so much flexibility that technically you could program it 7 days a week potentially with very different activities during that whole time.
Yeah, Gladstone said that they programmed it almost 300 days a year. So they were really, they had a person dedicated to it though. That was their only job, so.
So, are you all also, this is Jennifer, by the way, Terry, communicating with Park and Rec on the master plan that was developed too? Because there's a lot of crossovers here, because I was on that committee, well, it's started back up. So there's a lot of crossovers here. And one of the biggest, and we would have to really sell the community on this and the funding stream and so on and so forth. And just also a nugget when you were talking about the apartments. I know at one time you talked about the apartments being senior living. Years ago it was talked about maybe senior living, whatever. And the first thing I thought of is, you have a concert there, you're gonna have residents going nuts because you're having the concert. So that's a thing to think about too, is who is actually gonna be living in those apartments if we have, you know, those apartments. So.
Well, and I would counter that with, those are going to be the best places to be when the concerts are in
Right.
town. So
Exactly, but.
yeah,
nothing
but we're not,
88
no, it's not,
father, so.
at least to me, that is not a place you put your senior living.
Right, exactly.
You might put active aging somewhere in the neighborhood, but you're not going to put senior living there. That's going to be, you know, that's some prime market real estate you want to have there.
Going back to your question about Parks and Rec, they were involved in the study on the steering committee. I can't remember, is it Jason?
Yeah.
He was completely excited about what we were showing. At least at that time he was. So he was a part of the process.
As part of this whole discussion around the fair, there's also discussion around co-programming with Johnson County Parks and Rec for activities around downtown. So this gives another opportunity, another in, because we know that there is significant amounts of funding available at the county level. And we actually had talked to them in the past about that inclusive playground area, because they had done a similar thing to that in Shawnee. And the individual who runs Parks and Rec, Jeff Stewart, is a Gardner resident. So we want to be able to cultivate that relationship a lot more. He's very excited about this plan. He's seen it and he wants to assist. We just got to have a cohesive, unified, synergistic effort going forward with all of our stakeholders.
I think, Jennifer, to your point too, and just so you know, I mean, Jason and I, because the development world is now getting so interlinked because of our trail system and everything else, we're constantly talking about these things with the master plan that they're going through now, the update process and everything. So I think the element of this that's intriguing is, while the downtown plan shows this vision, that doesn't mean a community center can't be part of this vision. I think that's part of the aspect that Terry and Matt, when they're doing that, they're working within I'll say a context of the time when they were looking at it, but yet at the same time, there are plenty of opportunities that we could sit there and say, okay, if that is a priority of the community, where is the logical place to put it? And if it is in there, then let's start doing the evaluation. How does it fit into a vision like this, or where does it fit in? So I don't think we want to say one plan is mutually exclusive of another. I think that's what you're getting to. We don't want that competing interest kind of activity where all of a sudden we find ourselves in a dynamic. We can't do anything because we've got a camp over here and a camp over here, and they aren't working together.
Yeah, that's the more thing.
Yeah, and definitely they'll be coordinated or need to be, and they definitely can work together. And I mean, the idea of a community center was talked about when we first landed in Gardner on the Main Street plan, and where that could be or how that could be a part of something downtown. It was looked at as a potential south of the tracks and that undeveloped property by the school. It was looked at even up here, and I don't remember if it was in this study or the one that preceded it, but I mean, I still think there's a viable opportunity for a shared facility, as the mayor mentioned, with the county. I mean, it just seems, I don't know, maybe I'm simple, but it seems ridiculous that isn't just happening. That I know it takes money and relationships, and it takes people learning how to get over some 100-year-old traditions, but that property would be perfect for a shared facility that gives the city, the community facilities it needs and wants, but then also can expand and enhance the indoor facilities for the fair. Having workshops in that shed that I forget what they call it, but it's where they display it's the air conditioned building where they do the arts and crafts or whatever.
Yeah, the open building.
Thank you.
It's the
I mean,
open building. Yeah.
it's hard to imagine you couldn't build a better, nicer building that could serve both and be a real asset to the downtown visually and just functionally.
Yeah, Terry, I think it was part of this process. We did a couple massing studies, tested fits for that area.
Yeah. So, I mean, I really hope that does move forward. I hope that gets some energy behind it, because it seems somewhere in downtown, it seems like a good anchor, and that can pull people in as well. And it can be a good civic facility to just further enhance everything you're trying to do down here.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I mean, we're running close on time. Is there anybody else who has maybe burning question or any burning comments? Otherwise, I think we're gonna probably move on here. The meeting got started a little late. We're running a little longer than an hour and a half, which is usually our target here. So I don't know. Is there anybody else? I don't want to shut anybody off. Looks like we're good. With that, Terry, any parting words for you? I know you've moved to bigger and better things, but
Bigger. Let's just stop with bigger.
Yeah,
Let's
bigger things. But any parting comments on this to leave the group with?
Yeah, I think I'm excited that you're bringing it back to the surface and we're talking about it. We don't, and Dave, I know when you were in private practice and even on the public sector side, we don't want to do plans that just do a plan to do a plan. And it is not inspired. It's not enjoyable. And so the fact that you all are bringing this back and you're talking about how you can make it happen, that's exciting. I think it's good that you're actually pulling us, or the consultant, if you will, back in, because a lot of groups don't do that. They just sort of say, oh, we've got this. And so you're doing the right things. You're asking good questions. Everybody's kind of staying in their lane of expertise, and we can help you out as much as we can. So I think you're doing the right things, and I hope that bodes well for long-term seeing this thing realized. I know you've got creative people there. And I know, Dave's got a lot of good ideas and energy that can help move this forward. So just appreciate you calling us back to help walk through it. And even though I may not be hands-on involved, you're in good hands with Matt and the rest of our team there. And we would certainly like to just continue to help partner with you all to realize this. Matt, you want to put a bow on it?
Before you give it to Matt, I'll just mention Terry's actually calling in. You're in Chicago right now, aren't you? Isn't that where you?
No.
Oh, he cut off his sound. That's too bad.
Yes, he's in Chicago.
He's in Chicago.
Yes.
Yeah, Terry has taken on a different position in the role of Confluences, and so he stayed in touch, which I just want to, if you can hear me, Terry, I just want to, voice my words of appreciation to you for making the time, because again, I know this is a long distance thing, not just you're sitting in downtown Kansas City, so appreciate that effort. Matt, any parting words from you, because you
No.
will be the guy I probably
Yeah,
call more
absolutely.
often
I
now.
think Terry kind of said it very well, but when he mentioned about reaching out to other communities like Gladstone and others in Kansas, really do that. Really feel like, see what they're doing and what their thoughts are and how they made things work. I think you'll learn a lot through that process, and hopefully it will start to energize you into kind of finding that next move to get this thing off to the next right foot.
And I might just ask, Stephanie, if you're still hearing us, do you have any comments you want to throw in at this point or anything? Not hearing anything. It looks like she went off mute, but I don't know what happened there. Okay. All right, with that, I think we'll wrap this segment of the meeting up. I don't know that you all want to stick around for the rest of our stuff. We got a couple housekeeping items that we just go over at the end of our meeting, but if you want to stick around and hear about building permits and a few other things as updates, you're certainly welcome to do that. So, if not, thank you all. And expect Jason and I will bug you at some point in time. I'm sure we'll bug you again. Huh? No, we should probably finish up on the street. That would probably be the smart thing to do, and then go through the motions. So, we could just go through our discussion items real quick if you want to. Move
Thanks,
on.
guys. Thanks for coming.
That's okay.
Talk more about it. Did you want this? I'm Jason.
Yeah, same quote. I hit that a little hard, sorry. Yeah, I think so, because we lost Stephanie, it looks like. So what we might do, really can't take any actions other than adjourn, at this point, because we don't have. Well, we got a quorum. Yeah, we could still, yeah, let's continue the item 1 into the next meeting. For you, John, the links that are in here are all active links. These are plans that have been adopted. So the committee's been working to read through all those and get those taken care of. So we're good there. So yeah, we'll continue that.
So, motion to continue, discussion items, which is number 1, to the next meeting.
Second.
Those in favor?
All those in favor? Well, actually, you should do it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Harrison,
okay.
should we do it?
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Do you want us to do updates?
Just real quick, I want to get you the numbers, so I'm just going to give you the sheets on building permits for this last month. So if you take one, hand it around. Casey, I think the council members all got theirs in the Friday minute memo a couple weeks ago, so this is not any different than what you guys have had. So that's through June. These are the building permit numbers. The quick thing that I'm going to mention to you, I will say we are a little behind pace compared to last year, but I'm still optimistic about the rest of this year. I think what's really hindering us right now, and it's impacting a lot of people differently, the supply chains on some materials, the costs on some materials, the labor issues. We've got some issues even to a point of one development that, thank you. Is that better than? There's a one development that even was having issues with Water One because water line supplies at that size had disappeared and their supplier didn't have any more. So there's a lot of things going on in the marketplace that are outside our control as we're coming out of a pandemic that I don't think anybody was really anticipating it to be this way, And so now we're probably lagging a little bit compared to last year, but I'll still say the numbers are relatively strong overall for the year so far. And I just did a quick analysis for our finance people for their ratings call with the bond agencies. And what was interesting there is we still had we've had 66 new permits in residential and commercial areas that is going to about $32 million in value right now. About this time last year, we were closer in the 40, 45, so we're not very that badly. I just want people to know that it's a little slower than we all anticipated. So that's the intent of giving you those numbers so that you have that in front of you. I don't know that there's a whole lot more for me to talk about other than Planning Commission meeting next Monday. We have 2 items in front of us. The Treadway Apartments, which is actually the Grata development on the other side of the interstate. That's for 424 residential apartments. And then in what's called Cypress Creek, which is the Bergdorf property, which is about 90 acres just north of the high school on Madison, between Madison and 167th Street. There's a big open space there. That's a just under 289 unit single family residential subdivision that's going to be considered by the Planning Commission. So those are items that are still coming in, even though we're seeing this kind of building permit phase slowing down. There's still interest in development. There's still people bringing in plans, and pretty significant ones, quite frankly. So those are on the table. But that's all I've got for you tonight on that, on those items.
Okay, so no other business. So can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second. Okay. Those in favor?
Those in favor